Yes, Emmett, you got to be presentable. Which kind of brings me to our you floated this topic idea to me in our chat earlier about pricing and which I was just going to complain about haircut prices, but also having sympathy for people who cut hair. That obviously everything else has gone up in price, so they have to charge more. And pricing for me in my business, editing podcasts for clients, is always just like the stress ball of a conversation, even when
Sure.
the potential client is like super friendly, kind. Even I know they're not without means to pay, and I still am like, yeah, racked with either guilt
Yeah.
or worry, some combination of the two. So, but anyways, what was your thoughts on pricing that you wanted to sort of kick us off with?
Well, I was doing some shopping around for. I have a little project idea that I need some visual design help with, and it's just a little, just some quick print design, which I'm not the best at. Like I can do visual design work on the web, and I can do some simple stuff in print. I'm a developer who has an aesthetic or has a taste for design, which is really helpful when you're building HTML pages, just based off of visuals. Um, but this is something I have been trying to pick at and wasn't being successful. So I looked at some of the, designer marketplaces, or like job project marketplaces like Fiverr and Upwork. The one I landed on Upwork. I also looked at 99 Designs. Is that it? Yeah. Some of these things, which are kind of rightly lambasted in the designer world as being, you know, it's setting unfortunate expectations as to how cheap design should be. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And a lot of these people are not in our countries, so they have a different standard of living, and so they are cheaper per hour for the work that they do. And having dabbled in this every once in a while, you definitely get what you pay for, because there's a lot of automation that can be built into a very simple design process. Like, people will just dip into the same well of design objects over and over again and just give that to you. So something that you would hope would take somebody a couple hours might take them half an hour, and that's fine, because again, you generally get what you pay for. And I'm just wondering, because on a lot of these platforms, it's not just about design, it's not just about tech, it's also about editing services and that kind of thing. And I'm just wondering, like, as somebody who's starting out making YouTube videos or making podcasts or whatever, a lot of people start off editing it themselves, either because that's what they can afford or because that's how they want to refine their voice or whatever. How and when do you, like, what's your experience on how and when people make the decision to move away from editing themselves to hiring somebody? And do you start at those lower levels of just somebody who will do a decent job for $100 per episode or something, or even less, $50 per episode? And when do you graduate to a professional editor like yourself, who has more of a holistic approach and can kind of improve their business and not just the audio recording?
Right. And I'm still like I nervously twitch when you say professional editor such as myself, even though I have been doing it professionally for
I
however
know
long.
you are a professional.
Yeah, it's the imposter syndrome thing. You're people
Right.
if there's people watching,
And as an aside, imposter syndrome ties precisely into pricing directly. Like, I have
yes,
experience with that myself.
yes, hugely, bigly, as your president would say. Sorry. Your audio might be lower than usual,
Already?
or I might
Okay.
have
Might have turned
adjusted
me
something
down.
on my end. But people
Maybe I
in
can
the
turn
chat
myself.
could say if we're of equal value. I can adjust our levels
I
respectively.
can adjust my gain on my mic. Did that make a difference?
Yeah, a little louder. It's good. I think I flipped it
One.
to like turning off processing from guests because of who was a
Oh, I saw
guest.
that notification.
Alan
Yes.
said his audio, which he has an expensive setup, got substantially dismantled in the Ecamm Live configuration. So I tried turning. So I think now actually there's more room
Got
noise
it
coming
better.
from you. I can hear a bit more
Okay.
fan. But anyways, just as an
Oh, yeah.
aside for anybody messing with Ecamm Live, that setting is there, and then you can turn off audio processing by on guests it's for music mode, but I think it applies for professional air quotes
Right.
podcasting.
Well, if you're hearing fan, should I turn my gain down and you turn me up on your end?
I think it'll be fine.
Or is it okay?
It's not
It's okay.
so distracting. That it's just
Okay.
more. It's actually good to know what Ecamm was actually doing now. Maybe like a
Mm-hmm,
before and
mm-hmm.
after in terms of how much processing it was actually doing to help clean up your
Yep.
audio a little bit.
Well, I'll tell you, this is why I need a new computer, because that fan you're hearing is my computer.
Oh yeah,
Let me shut down some applications.
it always used to be for me. Dropbox would like spin the fan up, or I mean, obviously exporting Final Cut Pro or something. But
I forgot how many applications I have at the moment. I have Keynote open. I have iMovie open. I have Music open. I have a lot of things open.
the full iLife suite.
Right.
So what was the question again? Oh, when to hire and how high up the scale to go theoretically, I guess is sort of
Yeah. I don't know. Like theoretically,
Oh.
somebody could edit it themselves, but that probably takes a couple hours that they don't need to spend if somebody else is willing to do it for a quote unquote nominal amount of money.
Yeah.
When do you upgrade past a nominal amount of money
We'll get it by the end of the show.
to something that's an actual like investment, and what's the return on that investment?
Yeah. And I enabled properly Twitch alerts apparently because we just, while you were chatting there, the Scooby something, the font is too small on my screen to read it properly. You can tell how Twitch savvy I am. Anyways, thanks for the follow. So I think in my experience anyways, I'll speak from my experience. Obviously I can speculate what other people do and why their motivations might be, but generally speaking, my experience with people has been they are either completely overwhelmed with the idea of editing their podcast, period, don't even want to try it. And they're just like, I need to hire someone because that's the only way this is actually going to happen. I don't know what I'm doing, period. And so then they'll reach out to me, and either I'm priced too high or too low or whatever, or not too low, priced too high for what they're thinking a hobby, fun time podcast that they're doing is. And so then they'll go elsewhere.
People are always disappointed when you don't value the thing at the same level that they value it.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Or appreciate that, like the exposure you get from editing their fun podcast with their friend for 10 listeners or whatever isn't going to necessarily net you, make it up in volume or whatever. And so, but I do think there's so let's say podcaster who has some reason for whether they are big enough they have sponsorship or it's a business line expense and they can hire somebody. And where would they turn first, not knowing whether it's going to be a successful podcast or whether their manager is going to approve the budget for a full editor versus just randomly hiring someone on Fiverr. And I think in that case, it's probably like if you're testing out the waters, I always appreciate, and you can probably attest to this too, like just being upfront about what you're doing and what your goals are, why you want to pay someone else to do the thing that you're doing rather than just doing it yourself. And so then I can adjust my expectations. Even like it might be that it's a big project for a big company with lots of money, but the budget just isn't guaranteed. And so then maybe I am okay with like a little bit lower costs for me initially with the hopes that this gets approved as a full budget line thing. And then we go into actual production on it, not just the quickest barrier, what's the lowest barrier to entry kind of version of the podcast, the production, which I think we've talked about in the previous episode too, of like our conversation of like adding video to a podcast, right? It's right now with a couple of clients, I'm doing this where it's just low touch, minimal effort.
Yeah.
I still have to charge something because I'm doing more work, but it's not like we're doing a full blown video production on it. And so then it would get charged accordingly. So there is ways for
visuals that come along with the audio, and it's not that much work to just send it untreated onto the web.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. As much as I can plug my nose and just hit export to YouTube without feeling I'm offending somebody or myself. And so I think the same thing applies with podcasts too, and probably with web design work as well, is that basically you could have it so that it's something that you would want to take on, hire an editor for because it's going to make you money, or it's just a fun project and you want to just experience, like people like me are often willing to do a one-off project. If you at least just say up front, I'd just like to experience what it's like, hire an editor for this episode. I'm going to keep doing the episodes normally, but I just want to know what it feels like to work with someone, what the end quality sounds like, if it's better or worse. I might charge you a little more than I would, on a big, long project, obviously, where we can, I can't keep making it up in volume, which is a good pun for podcast editing, I guess. But yeah, there's the pity laugh. And so then, you can have that opportunity to sort of experience what it's like. And I don't know what it's like with Fiverr. I have to imagine it really depends on the person more than the price. So you could have a complete jerk who charges thousands of dollars per episode, obviously, that's awful to work with, but does really good work. And you could also have the most kind, gentle, helpful person who puts hours and hours into your project that charges you $10 for the episode. And maybe it doesn't sound as good, but you have a great experience with them because they're lots of fun. And everything in between. So, because I know I've had the inverse with clients who are like super rich and lots of money and super easy to work with. And then some who don't have any money and are like a pain to work with or whatever. So does that sort of help, or is that kind of gearing where you're headed?
I think so, because there's a question of like, when does it become worth it for, like, there's no standard, right?
Yeah.
Like it all depends on whether whoever's making the podcast or the YouTube videos or whatever, like they have their own personal standard for what a success is. And so like if it's a vanity project or something they don't expect to make money or get a whole lot of eyes, maybe they're willing to pay up front, or like just from the get-go, just hand it off to somebody like you who will just be professional. Look, they'll record the thing and then just not worry about it for a while. But then there are people who want to turn it into their livelihood. And so I've always been curious as to how people make the decision to let go of certain things at the literal expense of making less money. And that goes with the same idea of like, maybe, the next huge leap is quitting my job so that I can just keep doing this thing, but, in the main part of my day, so that I can now like have time off in the evenings where, that's what I was sacrificing before.
Yeah. I just want to make a point of calling out the drumstick you're carrying this week for pointer effects.
I don't know why. I was unpacking and I found it, and it's still on my desk because it doesn't really have anywhere to go.
That's I'm not complaining. I wasn't just in case someone's wondering what's being waved around there. It's funny because we have a drum kit in our basement and my kids play and stuff and for fun. But actually the drumsticks become a dog chew toy if we're not careful. And so that's actually what I was like just realizing we just tossed a drumstick that he ate too much of to be safe anymore.
Yes.
For drumming
this
or
particular drumstick came out of a box of stuff that my mom gave me at some point, and like these are literally the drumsticks I learned on in junior high school.
Whoa! So like that was what, 10 years ago or so?
Yeah, maybe a little more.
Like that. Binary says I want to learn how to play drums. Yeah, actually the funny thing is like I'm a guitar player. Where is it? That side? Yeah. So I have guitars hanging here behind me. I play guitar, but drums is like I've taken lessons, and I can do like an occasional beat, the odd beat. But like I can't really. There's something about the feet and the hands together is not what my body was designed to do best as far as playing along with music. But it's been fun to watch my kids who are like listen to a song and then go sit on the drum kit. And now they can just look up on YouTube and see like the music chart for that, play along to it, and then actually do pretty good at that without any serious lessons at all. And anyway.
And it's not that hard to like take a track and remove the drums from it.
Yeah.
So that you could lay down your own drum track.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Just
thanks to and or find the YouTube version of every possible song without or with drums but definitely you should, because it's a fun little physical activity as well as just fun musically to be able to play drums, because every musician almost out there is looking for a drummer for some reason or another, whether just to play along with or for more professional ambitions. So that could be a whole other conversation, is when to hire a drummer and how much you should pay.
Exactly.
I don't know how to price that, but yeah. What about you with let's flip it the other way, like with web projects? Let's say you said print originally, but like I don't know anybody who's printing things anymore, so that's not as helpful.
Yeah.
Which is fun.
Like I think the difference for me is, well, for me in particular, is like I can build most things myself. That's not a problem. But let's say I'm out of time. And if I have a little bit of money, I can go on one of these platforms and know that I will probably just get a really basic end result using one of the handful of open source HTML quote unquote library of designs that are just available on the web. Like a lot of websites look the same because they literally start from the same, template or design system.
Yeah.
And in fact, I'm guilty of that myself. If somebody comes to me with a project and they say, I've only got X dollars and I would like to charge X times $4, I can say, well, I've only got so much time. If I start with these pre-designed templates, then that'll save both of us a bunch of time and money, and we can tweak it to make it look and feel like you want, but it'll save us a bunch of time, and it won't be wholly original or maybe exactly what you want, but we're both going to come out ahead in the end. Like that's the sort of thing I would expect most of the time to get out of these platforms. Like once you start speaking to somebody who's going to spend dozens of hours on a project and have meetings with you, and we're going to have goals and touch points and stuff like that, then you start getting into an order of magnitude more money, but the product is going to be 10 times better, if not 100 times better, because it's going to be exactly what you want instead of a thing that's not quite what you want, that is kind of shiny in a way that you appeals to your customers in some way.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's similarly with audio too, or video even for that matter. But like you could start with templates, you can start with pre-made audio jingles. You can kind of get a rough, it's kind of like how much work are you willing to do yourself? Just like with even a home renovation project too. Like you can do the demolition, but then hire someone to do the finishing or whatever. And similarly with web or audio projects, I feel like it's the same kind of idea. Are you willing to put in time and just like listen to your podcast yourself and find the spots where you could edit out stuff and then send that like rough chopped up version to an editor who will then just do the fine tuning of EQs and stuff maybe that you don't understand? You'll pay less, but you might miss out on a few opportunities that the editor might actually pick up on that you wouldn't have otherwise because it's your own. You're too close to the metal or whatever, as they say. I think that's where web projects too, especially for me, as someone who's built websites before but doesn't have the muscle for or the brain power or whatever to execute on a design and just actually figure out what would work best for even you can look at my own lemonproductions.ca business website, which is in dire need is what I'm trying to say of a refresh, because there's like contrasting colors, or like the accept cookie thing is like blocks out the yellow of the text and you can't even read it or whatever, and other things on the website. The contact form doesn't quite work all the time, so I have to manually log in and check to make sure I'm not missing some opportunity. And yet even still, with all of that being said, I can't put in the effort to fix it myself or do a redesign, because I just always get stuck on like, oh, if I do this, then I should do that, then I should do this. Oh, I should maybe just hire someone, but then that costs money. And so then in effect, the basement renovation project or website project just sits because it's just a ball of thought that has to like sort of land. And that's what I think I'm okay with often people asking me, like just sort of like using me as a sounding board for what should I do with my podcast idea and where could I take it? How hard is it to hire you to edit? And having those conversations without worrying about getting paid for it. Because I feel like those conversations, as long as it's not like, obviously if it's whatever, Microsoft is coming and saying, hey, can we ask you some questions and not pay you?
Yeah, I think the crux of a lot of those conversations, especially those first conversations, is tell me how complex this idea is, right? Because you're a professional, whatever the situation, you're talking to a professional. I don't know how complex designing this thing is going to be. You tell me how long it's going to take. You know what I mean? Yep. Or like, I don't know how complex it is to set up a podcast. I imagine it's just sitting in front of my computer and making a recording and sending it to somebody. But that it takes 10x that effort, whereas the other person doesn't know that. You know the value of the 10x. They don't know the value of the 10x. So that's what those first conversations are about. Absolutely. And that's maybe one of the differences between talking to somebody like us and just going to one of these platforms is you're going to get what you ask for, but you don't necessarily know that you're asking for the right thing. That has happened a lot, where I've asked for this, this, and this, and I got those three things, but I was making assumptions that there would be underlying logic behind those three things. That wasn't provided because I went the cheap route.
Right. And we kind of like you throw AI stuff into the mix now and vibe coding and all those things, but like where you could technically punch into some of these services and be like, design me a print brochure for this thing or a website that does this. And it technically maybe will even do that. And to the average customer who visits that website, it might even almost work 100% of the time until you get to some weird edge case where it completely falls over and or doesn't serve your purposes really, because there isn't the care taken in those in-between steps and similarly with podcasting where we've seen before, like I can edit stuff in Descript or Riverside's editor. But if I don't carefully go over that, I'm going to miss the part where halfway through the conversation, it just completely barfs on the audio because it doesn't know why a dog is barking or whatever the thing might be
Right.
that it completely misses. Or the Fiverr person who's editing doesn't, because they're listening at 200x or something just to like
Right.
plow through
Right.
everything.
Are there not like the Fiverr designer doesn't care that I need it to be responsive, for example? They don't care that I'm interested in having it work on, maybe a couple more browsers than, would normally be required, that sort of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
And so I can get a product back that then takes me as much time or more to actually make it meet my requirements.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And that's where that's the pricing part. That's hard to like, sometimes hard to quantify as the estimator, the person sending the estimate to the person or estimating a project, because you don't know in advance what some of those things might be. And that's where that stress and or imposter syndrome kind of kicks in of like, what's going to happen if I don't
Yeah.
if I don't account for those things that they're going to ask
Yeah.
for down the road, or how picky are they going to be about, like Emmett says, IE11 support.
So how do you price things?
How do I?
And this is like, that's the wrong way to phrase that question. How did you land, how long have you been comfortable with the way you price things? And was there an event that got you there?
An event. I like that. I think like the way, because I started organically, which organically, that's a silly phrase actually, because everything obviously I think in this, anyways, I started like as a side thing in addition to what I was doing already, where I was building websites. So if my current business model or whatever has been editing podcasts, 10-ish years ago, I switched from building websites to building podcasts. But because it happened slowly, I was able to kind of like not have to worry if, client A, the first client, didn't work out the way I hoped it would. And I very much approached it, and I would advise myself, 15 years ago when I was doing this too, like I stressed way too much about individual clients and the estimates I was doing for them, instead of just like doing the mental work while I was doing the process of building the thing, whether it's a website or a podcast, of figuring out, is this actually right price-wise on an ongoing basis, whether it was, for the project or for 100 episodes, and just looking back and taking time to evaluate, so that then when the next client comes along, I can say, actually, if you're going to need whatever, 3 sponsor spots, I should charge you more than the person who wants 1 sponsor spot, because that's more work.
Yeah.
Or if you are saying, or you're swearing a lot and I have to bleep you, those kinds of things cost extra, but I wouldn't have known that at the time to consciously charge extra for that. So taking each new client, and even still 10, 15 years into this, taking each client as a learning opportunity, so that for the next one, I know, actually I should charge you if they, like all of a sudden they're like, actually we have 5 guests. We forgot to mention that, or whatever. Those kind of contingencies. And so I feel like I kind of have grown a little bit with pricing, and it kind of just, my brain still works. I know project pricing at least was really hot for a while in web dev and stuff, and kind of charging by the month or whatever for a project. And that's just how long you're going to work on a thing. And that maybe works there really well. My brain has always just been like, widget comes in, I fix widget, and widget goes out. And I need to know how long it takes me in terms of time. And then I work that back to an hourly rate. That's just how my brain functions. And I've tried to not do that way, because it would make way more sense to just say, we're going to charge you whatever, monthly or whatever, be on a retainer for a client. And I think that's probably the way I should grow if I ever really wanted to grow bigger, better, stronger, faster. But my brain is hard to.
I have belatedly come to that realization as well, that like, even if it means a slight discount on an hourly basis, that recurring revenue is more important and certainly easier to deal with in your brain and on your books than trying to charge, discreetly for every moment you work on a project.
Yes. Yeah, that's in web stuff that stressed me out so much, because every time a client calls you or emails you with a request, are you like, is this are we still within the framework of what we agreed on, or is this outside of that a little bit and enough to justify a conversation about pricing? And what if that's going to be the trigger for them to be like, sorry, this is too much, I hate you now.
Yeah, I think we avoided a lot of those conversations. Like we've kind of, I had a design partner, Mike, who we've kind of gone our separate ways in terms of projects recently. Like we do that every once in a while, but like his life's in a different place now. He's got kids, he's getting older, and he needs to blah blah blah. Like his focus needs to be over there instead of on this
Yeah.
business that we've just kind of been working on together. But like we kind of take projects as they come up. We've never been terribly ambitious in terms of growing our agency and hiring people and bigger. That's not us. But what I think in hindsight, what we did in order to kind of mitigate the stress of dealing with prices, 90% of the time we just did a flat price. We did it up front. If it took us more time, we were usually fine with that. If it was going to take, if something unexpected came up, we would say, okay, this is more than we agreed to. Here's a change order, blah, blah, blah. We need X more dollars to do this. But the flat fee is how we avoided it. But the flat fee is also how we undervalued ourselves. Like we were like, at the end of the day, the hourly rate was probably a lot less than we would have wanted to be paid. So in order to avoid a lot of those conversations and a lot of the stress of like not being able to finish a thing or something taking longer than we thought it would take, we just did a flat fee. And that was easy, but even over time, we were really bad about increasing that fee. So, over time, we were making even less and less just because we were bad at that until we kind of finally got a handle on it. And it was one particular client who was like, look, I want to bring you onto this project I'm doing with some other people. I know I'm not the easiest to work with. They are definitely not the easiest to work with. So you should charge us X dollars an hour for this whole project. And we sort of, okay, we'll do that. And that was kind of a wake up from moment for us of like, oh, this really cool person that we definitely want to work with thinks we're worth X. And like, that's not a thing you get very often, I don't think. Like you can judge yourself based on what you see over there in the rest of the economy of the industry that you're working in, but it's rare that somebody looks at you and says you're worth X. And that's like, that'll either be affirming for you or disappointing to you, but either way, that's information for you to use.
Yeah. That's definitely especially when there's like connections. I found that the hardest. Like I've had clients who are like a client who is like multi-million-dollar person, quasi celebrity. Well, is a celebrity, and you're like, I'm figuring out whether I'm going to charge you like an extra $10 per hour or whatever it works out to, and
Right.
I know, we both know, everybody knows that's not even a blip on your registry.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't even. And so it kind of broke my brain a little bit working with that project, where it's just like, I don't even know how to fathom this, because like literally while we're talking, in the time it took you to email me, you just made more than I'll make in a year. Like what does it matter
Right.
what I'm charging you?
But at the same time, people who have those kinds of resources have them partly because they are, I don't want to say stingy, but they are careful with their money. And so like that extra $10 doesn't seem like it would be a lot of money, but that extra $10 broke a rule that they didn't think was going to be broken. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you had the project straight out of the line they'd set for themselves. And so, even in that situation, that extra $10 or whatever it is might be a concern, even if they have the resources.
Yeah. And then also the feeling of, and I felt this with that client, but also even other clients where they're just like a bigger entity. So it feels that's where the imposter syndrome creeps in, where you're like, well, they could just very easily toss me aside and go hire someone else, even if it costs them double or whatever.
Because what I'm doing is very replaceable.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And it's hard to understand. Like that I think it's hard to know how other people value you.
Yeah. Emmett said my first web project made me question if I want to do freelance web projects. Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah. And I think hopefully your first one is a learning experience, and it's a good learning experience. And it doesn't mean it goes amazing and you get a bunch of money and a bunch more clients from that or whatever. But hopefully whatever project you're, whether it's web, audio, video, etc., you have a good learning experience, and you do, like I said, take time to learn from that so that you can do better on the next one. Pricing and estimating and all that kind of stuff, and workflow and things like that. To me is the one thing where in doing that, you kind of, I for a while I've had to learn how to price appropriately for a project where knowing that if I got the job with a client, I'm not going to enjoy it as much, but if there's a price that makes it worthwhile, and not like gouging them or anything like that, but just knowing that there's some amount of dollars where if it's boring or it's annoying or whatever the thing is, at least I could say, well, you're making this much, just shut up and stop complaining and do the thing, instead of worrying about whether you're achieving your life goals with this one project.
Right. And I think that's what that one client we had was saying to us, was look, this is going to be a super annoying project. I want to make sure it's worth it to you because I need to get this project finished.
Yeah.
And so he was willing to make us comfortable from a financial standpoint. Like, we didn't get rich or anything, but like,
Yeah.
it was an amount of money per hour that we only charged for like 1 or 2 hour projects. And this was going to be a multi-hundred hour project.
Yeah. Yeah. Luckily, I had a designer set my prices for me. Pricing is hard. Yeah. And that's actually the other thing I would say. Like, if you give an opportunity to work alongside someone in your industry and they're helping you price out a thing with their experience, hopefully more than yours or whatever, or even just, again, a learning opportunity, that goes a long way. And asking people in your industry what they charge. Like, I feel like, I'm sure there's people who are very, protective of those things, but in my time anyways, it seems like it's gotten way more open. Maybe I'm just like, some of the people I follow online are through like Justin Jackson at Transistor even are very much in the build in the open. Is that what it's called? I forget what anyways. And so then they're very building in public. Yeah. Transparent about their pricing and how much they're making even. And like really exposing everything and to a great degree that I wouldn't even be comfortable with necessarily, but you can learn a lot from those situations too, and paying attention to what people say on podcasts, obviously, and things where they're not like necessarily just publishing a web page with their pricing model, but they'll talk about it in a podcast. It's a little more hidden away, I guess, as it were. So was there any other interesting pricing moments for you, either like when you're hiring or doing work, that you've had?
I don't know. I think it really is just a matter of there are very few shortcuts. Like, you can pay somebody $20 to do a thing on Fiverr. You're going to get $20 worth of work out of them.
Yeah.
And if it's just a flyer that you need to send around to the neighborhood next week, maybe that's fine. But if it's something for your own business, that's something you need to be on a theme and reflect a brand, you probably need to pay a little bit more.
Yeah. Yeah, Emmett said, I see some people's pricing and I can't even say that number with a straight face, which I can sympathize with, but I know I often have the old adage of like, if you quote a price and they don't ask any questions, you didn't charge enough, is true-ish. Like, it's a hard one to, like, you can't just blanket that one. Obviously, everything's different and there's variables all over the place. But anytime, even with bigger projects or whatever, if people are too quick to accept that price, then I just make a mental note of like, okay, probably there was more room there. I'm not necessarily losing money just because I didn't get that money. Like, I'm still hopefully charging enough that I'm making what I needed to make to do this project.
It never feels good to like leave money on the table.
Yeah. Especially with bigger companies or bigger projects where you're like, well, it's going to their shareholders, or I could get a little more to help feed my family. Or whatever. So,
yeah. But as you say, if it is a first project for a big client that has some pockets full of money, giving them that satisfaction of, this person isn't trying to, gouge me, leaves a good impression for future projects.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say it's the biggest thing is, like, at least in my career, has been networking more than the specific price. Like doing the work well, communicating well, over communicating if need be, and doing what you say you're going to do, and the price is kind of almost negligible at that point for so many people. Like, obviously the smaller projects where it's a hobby podcast and they just kind of get bored of it and don't want to do it anymore, you can't fix that or whatever, or the website that they decide isn't going to work for them or whatever. That's not indicative of your pricing or your work output or whatever. But it's definitely the networking and how you handle those, either the arguments or the disputes over pricing or whatever, and then debate that, or sorry, that ability to maintain that connection with those people and the possible future friends or coworkers or whatever that they bring to the table as well. So I've had a few times, Emmett asked, I see here, just have either of you had a project not work out because of pricing? And I don't know that I've definitely lost some projects that I've bid on or estimated on over the years in terms of podcasts. And I don't know explicitly that it was ever for pricing. I definitely had a web project or two where it was like, they just weren't willing to pay what was even barely required to do the cost. And this is long before Squarespace and stuff were around. But how about you with pricing? Have you ever?
Nothing particularly sticks out, but it's definitely like probably a third of the time you don't get a gig, it's because the budgets didn't line up, for whatever reason. It's like they thought something was easier than it was, is usually what happens. But no, it's at least 5 times more complex than they thought it was, and that's not the money they had set aside for the project.
Yeah.
Like another third of the time it's just timing doesn't work out, and another third of the time is just you don't vibe, and that's okay.
Yeah. That's the
The
toughest one,
only
actually.
time I think projects have failed for not pricing after, like, if we get a gig, and yeah, I've never had a project fail for pricing like after we've agreed to do the job. After that, it's always, every once in a while, it's a blue moon when something fails past that point. But it's always because somewhere we had crossed our lines in terms of expectations of what the project was actually supposed to be.
Yeah.
So one or the both of us had failed to communicate clearly.
Which is the bane of like any sort of creative work, I'm sure, whether it's, laying brick in someone's driveway and the homeowner assumes you knew that they wanted an intricate design with the brick and you thought they just wanted it straight through and nobody had that conversation.
Right, right.
And luckily with web stuff, it's a little less permanent, I guess, is the nice
Yeah.
way of saying it.
Right.
There's still work involved, obviously, but ripping up a
Yeah.
driveway full of brick is not the same as just deleting code, hopefully.
Yeah.
I think the person, what did you say, the 130, like vibe, I guess. Yeah. Like I had one client where it was like,
Yeah.
I was excited to work with them. There was like, I didn't know them at all, but they're an interesting person, interesting project, company they were building or whatever. And for whatever reason, like I did an episode of the podcast they were launching, or two, I can't remember. And there's without even much warning, it was just like, actually, we're going to take this in a different direction. And it wasn't, they had
Yeah.
no word or discernible, like you did this wrong or you didn't do this or you
Yeah.
did this too much or whatever. It was just like,
Yeah.
just didn't connect. And I was like, actually, it gutted me for a while because I was just like, I don't even know what I did or didn't do to be able to like learn from.
Yeah.
And yeah, anyways, work through that obviously, but, and I'm glad in hindsight now I can say I'm
Yeah.
glad I didn't get to continue working on that project, not out of spite, but just because it didn't go anywhere and
Yeah.
whatever for reasons. But those are the tough ones where it's hard not to take it personally because you're like, I think I'm doing the same thing the person you hired to do. And you just, and like, yeah, again, glad we didn't vibe, even though I wasn't the one saying, I didn't break up
Yeah.
with them. They broke up with me kind of idea. So those are
Yeah.
harder
Right.
to take, but
Yeah.
again,
And I definitely
learning.
noticed as I've gotten older, the vibe has soured more on my part. Not more on my, but like more often, I'm the one going, this
Yeah.
isn't going the way I thought it was going to go. And it's partly because I realized that I'm really bad at saying no. I want to give people what they want, but as I get older, I'm less happy about the consequences of that behavior. So yeah, so another one of the reasons that Mike and I aren't working together is because I want to do less client work, and so I'm looking at my kind of building projects for myself, working on products for myself, and it's because of that very thing of like I found myself in distress because I was failing at trying to build a thing I knew I didn't want to build for somebody, or I didn't think that they actually needed that thing, or like I wasn't down with the whole client says I do a thing, so I do a thing. And so it was
Right.
time for me to like get myself out of as many of those situations as I can afford to get out of.
Get out of the thing while you're doing the thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of, that brings me actually a tangent maybe from what we're talking about that's kind of related to pricing or just like client relations. Maybe this is a bit of a, not just a tangent, but a completely different topic that we could queue up for next time or another conversation is like the idea, the grass is greener on the other side, where if you went back to work for a design agency, a bigger company, a bigger, whatever that is in your field exactly, and how much relief you would have over not having to have the pricing conversation, assuming you're not in sales, you're just
Yeah.
the web widget builder person,
Yeah.
or I'm just the podcast
Right.
editor for, bigger company X. And where do you sort of land on some of those thoughts and conversations in your brain or with friends or whatever when you have those thoughts?
Yeah. It's an interesting topic. Like, I mean, the question is why freelance, right? Why be a contractor? Why not? You have the skills, go take it to somebody who's willing to pay you for those skills, but then do the rest of the harder work, the book work, the sales work, the what have you. Yeah, and that's an interesting question. Like I've been freelance for, I think, like I don't know your full history, but we've been freelance for, I think, at least the same amount of time.
Yeah.
And it would be interesting to talk about.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think like 15-ish years for sure, if not I consider I was
Yeah.
working for someone else doing effectively like small business freelancing. I guess it was like three of us, but it was still felt like I don't know what the threshold is for like number of employees where you're a company versus a group of freelancers working together. But
Yeah.
anyways, I guess maybe if you have health benefits, that pushes you into or a union, I would assume. I
I
guess,
don't
but
know.
yeah. Anyways,
I've never had them. I know it's been a long time. I've had benefits. It's been a
yeah.
long time, but I've never had them like with my own company.
Yes, yeah, that would be the whole other thing too. That's I think like my professional career, working career, started life at the local university doing just working in the computer store, and so I was part of a union, part of had benefits, had
Mm.
vacation, had all the things, and it wasn't fulfilling creatively or professionally really, and so I moved on, and like obviously with budget cuts and things, I can look back and say, oh, phew, I'm glad I did, but who knows where I would have ended up in the career ladder at the university, but. I do often still look back in fondness of like,
Yeah.
oh, 5 weeks vacation before I was there, even 5 years plus Christmas off. Like that's a thing that I don't get
That is
these
something.
days. So,
Yeah.
anyways, and especially braces, paying for kids' braces. I don't know if you know that that's expensive. So, yeah.
Nope. You see any
Hopefully you
children
don't.
around here?
Yeah.
Nope.
Hopefully you don't ever have to pay for a random child's braces out of your budget. But
Yeah.
at any rate, cool. Well, thanks, Tim. We'll cue that up for next time, maybe. And thanks to the folks who Emmett and others, Biner, if you're still around, and others for watching this time. And most Thursdays, I'll say tentatively, we Tim and I chat, and then occasionally other times. I've been trying to have. I've referred to myself as doing the. Do you know Jason Langsdorf? Learn with Jason videos he does.
Mm-mm.
Live streams every Tuesdays and Thursdays on a much more professional level. He's a client of mine. Yeah, that's how I say that. I do some
Mm-hmm.
video editing work for him. But anyways, I'll be the Timu Learn with Jason talking about tech stuff with people that they're doing. Anyways, yeah, most Thursdays and then occasionally other random times. So you hit the subscribe button on Twitch or on YouTube, wherever this ends up. And thanks, Tim. Talk to you next week.
Yeah. No problem. Bye.